They passed around my handmade turquoise earrings at Christmas dinner like they were examining evidence of my failure. My brother Michael held them up to the light with this theatrical squint, as if he was appraising costume jewelry at a garage sale. "These are actually pretty decent, Jess," he said with that patronizing tone that always made my stomach twist. "You know, you could probably sell stuff like this at one of those little craft fairs downtown." The whole table erupted in knowing chuckles. My father, Robert, leaned back in his chair and shook his head with that familiar look of gentle disappointment he'd perfected over the years. "Our Jessica, always the dreamer," he said, cutting into his ham. "Still convinced she's going to make it big with her little jewelry hobby." My mother patted my hand across the table, her voice dripping with that special brand of concern that felt more like pity. "Honey, maybe it's time to think about something more stable. Michael's firm is always looking for good administrative assistants. You're so organized, and the benefits would be wonderful for Emma." What they didn't know was that 12 hours earlier, I'd signed the final papers to sell my little jewelry hobby to Lux Heritage Group for $50 million. $50 million. But I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet, because sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting people dig their own graves with their assumptions. My name is Jessica Martinez, and this is the story of how my family's mockery became my multi-million-dollar motivation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in a house where success had a very specific definition. In the Martinez family, you either wore a suit to work, had a degree that impressed people at parties, or married someone who did. My older brother Michael checked all the boxes perfectly. Law degree from ASU, corner office in downtown Phoenix. Beautiful wife Amanda, who hosted dinner parties and posted about their Scottsdale lifestyle on Instagram. My younger sister Katie was following the approved path too, halfway through nursing school with my parents, proudly footing the bill and bragging to anyone who'd listen about their future nurse daughter. Then there was me, the middle child who'd somehow missed the memo about acceptable career choices. I'd always been drawn to creating things with my hands. While Michael studied for the LSAT and Katie memorized anatomy textbooks, I spent hours sketching jewelry designs and learning metalworking, techniques from YouTube videos. After high school, I'd enrolled in community college for business, thinking maybe I could find a compromise between my creativity and my family's expectations. But life had other plans. I met David during my sophomore year. He was charming, ambitious, studying to be an engineer, and my parents loved him immediately. When I got pregnant with Emma at 21, the family response was swift and decisive. David and I got married in a small ceremony at my parents' church. I dropped out of school to focus on being a wife and mother, and everyone acted like this was exactly how things were supposed to unfold. For a while, it felt like maybe they were right. David graduated, got a good job with a construction company, and we settled into a little apartment in Tempe. Emma was the light of my life, this perfect little person who looked at me like I hung the moon. But during those long days, at home while David worked, I found myself drawn back to jewelry making. It started small, just a way to keep my hands busy while Emma napped. I'd watch tutorials on my phone, practice basic wire wrapping, experiment with different stones and metals. My family saw it as a cute hobby. "Look at Jess, playing with her beads," my dad would say when I'd show up to Sunday dinner wearing something I'd made. They'd nod politely when I tried to explain a new technique I'd learned, the same way you'd listen to a child describe their imaginary friend. Supportive enough to avoid being cruel, dismissive enough to make it clear they didn't take it seriously. The real turning point came during the pandemic. David's company had major layoffs, and suddenly we were living on unemployment checks and whatever side work he could find. Money was impossibly tight. Emma needed new shoes, the car needed repairs, and I watched our savings account dwindle to Nothing while David sent out resume after resume with no response. That's when desperation met opportunity. I'd been making jewelry for 3 years by then, building up a collection of pieces I'd created just for fun. My best friend Maya, who worked in tech and understood e-commerce in ways that seemed magical, to me, suggested I try selling online. "Jess, people are buying everything online right now," she said during one of our socially distanced park meetups while Emma played on the swings. "And your stuff is gorgeous. Way better than half the overpriced jewelry I see on Instagram." I was terrified. What if nobody bought anything? What if my family was right and this was just an expensive hobby? But with Emma asking why we couldn't go to the grocery store like we used to, and David growing more frustrated and distant every day, I didn't have the luxury of fear. I started with Etsy. Maya helped me set up the shop, take decent photos with my phone and a white sheet, write descriptions that didn't sound like a 6th grader's book report. I called it Desert Rose Designs, inspired by the Arizona sunsets that painted our apartment walls pink every evening while I worked on new pieces. The first sale came 3 days after I launched, a pair of silver and turquoise earrings, $35. I stared at the notification email for probably 10 minutes, reading it over and over again. Someone, a complete stranger in Michigan, had looked at something I made and decided it was worth their money. I cried right there at the kitchen table, and when Emma asked why I was sad, I told her I wasn't sad at all. I was proud. David's reaction was less enthusiastic. $35. "Bucks, Jess?" "That's great, but it's not exactly going to solve our problems." He wasn't wrong, but he also didn't understand the significance of that first sale. It proved that my work had value beyond my own opinion. It meant this wasn't just a hobby anymore. The sales started slowly. A necklace here, a bracelet there. I reinvested every penny back into supplies, staying up late after Emma went to bed to fulfill orders and create new pieces. Maya helped me understand SEO, social media marketing, customer service best practices. She never asked for anything in return, just believed in what I was building in a way that felt revolutionary after years of gentle discouragement from my family. By the end of 2020, I'd made $12,000. It wasn't enough to replace David's lost income, but it was real money. Money I'd earned with my own hands and creativity. I felt like I'd discovered a superpower I never knew I had. David didn't see it that way. The stress of unemployment, combined with being cooped up in our small apartment during lockdowns, had worn both of us down. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He started making comments about how much time I spent on that jewelry thing, instead of looking for a real job. The tension in our apartment grew thick and suffocating, and Emma, sensitive and perceptive even at 6 years old, started asking why Daddy seemed angry all the time. The end came in March 2021. David had finally found a new job, but it required relocating to Colorado. It was a good opportunity, better pay, a chance to start fresh. But it would mean leaving Phoenix, leaving Maya, leaving the small but growing business I'd built from nothing. More importantly, it would mean leaving my support system and starting over in a place where I knew no one. "You can make jewelry anywhere, Jess," David said during the fight that ended our marriage. "But I can't pass up this opportunity. I need you to be supportive here." I looked at him, this man I'd married when I was barely more than a girl, and realized we'd grown into completely different people. He saw my business as a hobby that could be packed up and moved anywhere. I saw it as proof that I was capable of more than either of us had ever imagined. "I can't go," I said quietly. "I won't go." The divorce was messy but quick. David was angry, felt betrayed that I'd choose my little craft project over our marriage. My family was horrified that I'd let a good man walk away over what they saw as stubbornness and misplaced priorities. Even Katie, usually my ally, pulled me aside after Sunday dinner to ask if I was sure I was making the right choice. "He's offering you security, Jess," she said, her voice gentle but worried. "Emma needs stability. Are you really going to gamble? Her future on selling jewelry online?" I understood their concern. From the outside, it looked like I was choosing an uncertain creative pursuit over a stable marriage and traditional family life. But they couldn't see what I saw. They couldn't see the spreadsheets Maya had helped me create, showing steady, month-over-month growth. They couldn't see the messages from customers telling me how much they loved their pieces, how my jewelry had become part of their special moments. They couldn't see the vision I had for what this could become. Most importantly, they couldn't see how much happier Emma and I were in our little apartment, just the two of us, after David left. The tension that had filled our home for months dissolved overnight. Emma started sleeping better, laughing more, asking if she could help me photograph new pieces for the website. She'd arranged the jewelry on my makeshift backdrop with the same careful attention I used to create it, and watching her take pride in being part of something we were building together felt like the validation I'd been seeking my whole life. The family dinners became exercises in polite endurance. Every Sunday I'd show up with Emma and the questions would start immediately. How was the business going? Was I making enough to support myself? Had I thought about David's offer to reconcile? Maybe it wasn't too late to work things out. Michael would share updates about his latest case, his promotion, his wife's volunteer work with the Junior League. Katie would talk about her clinical rotations, her professor's praise, the job offers she was already getting before graduation. And then they'd turn to me with those expectant faces, waiting for me to share something equally impressive. "The jewelry thing is still going well," I'd say, keeping my voice neutral. "Orders are steady." "That's nice, honey," my mother would respond, the same way she'd respond if I told her I'd had a pleasant day at the park. Then she'd launch into a story about her friend's daughter who'd just gotten engaged to a doctor, or her co-worker's son who'd been promoted to regional manager at his company. They didn't know that steady orders meant I was now making more money than I'd ever made in my life. They didn't know that I'd moved operations out of my spare bedroom and into a small warehouse space in Chandler. They didn't know that Maya had become my official business partner, handling the tech side while I focused on design and production. They didn't know that we'd hired 3 part-time employees to help with fulfillment, or that I was working with a business attorney to trademark Desert Rose Designs. What they knew was that I was a single mother who'd thrown away a good marriage to play with jewelry, and because that fit their narrative about my poor judgment and unrealistic expectations, they never bothered to look deeper. The invisibility was both painful and protective. It hurt to sit at that dinner table every week, listening to my parents beam about Michael's achievements while treating my growing success like a temporary phase I'd eventually outgrow. But it also gave me freedom to build something without their interference or opinions. I didn't have to justify my business decisions or defend my growth strategies. I could just focus on the work, the customers, and the slowly building empire they couldn't see. By the end of 2021, Desert Rose Designs had generated $85,000 in revenue. Not profit, revenue. But it was enough to prove this wasn't a fluke or a lucky streak. I had a real business, with real customers, solving real problems. People wanted beautiful, affordable jewelry that told their stories. They wanted pieces that felt personal and meaningful, not mass-produced and generic. I was giving them something they couldn't find anywhere else, and they were paying me well for it. The family's reaction to my second-year numbers was typically dismissive. $85,000 sounds like a lot, my father said, cutting into his Sunday pot roast. But that's before expenses, right? And taxes? What are you actually taking home? I didn't tell him that my net profit was $32,000, more than I'd made in any year of my marriage. I didn't tell him that I'd been able to move Emma and me into a better apartment, or that I'd started a college fund for her that was already growing steadily. I definitely didn't tell him that Maya, and I had plans to expand into wholesale, or that we'd been approached by 3 different boutiques about carrying our line. Instead, I nodded and said, "You're right, expenses add up, but it's working for now." "For now?" he repeated, satisfied that I'd acknowledged the temporary nature of my success. "Just remember, Jess, it's never too late to go back to school. Get a teaching certificate, maybe. Something stable with good benefits." Emma, who'd been quietly coloring at the kids' table, looked up at me with those big dark eyes that missed nothing. Even at 7, she understood more about our situation than my parents did. She saw me working late into the night, not because I had to, but because I loved what I was building. She saw the pride on my face when I showed her customer reviews, the excitement when we planned new collections together. She saw me happy in a way I'd never been during my marriage, and she was smart enough to know that happiness was worth protecting. That night, after I'd tucked her into bed and read her the same princess story she'd requested every night for 2 months, she asked me a question that broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. "Mama, why don't Grandma and Grandpa think your jewelry is important?" I sat on the edge of her bed, searching for an answer that would be honest without being bitter. Sometimes, baby, people have different ideas about what's important. They think important means certain kinds of jobs or certain ways of living, but I think important means doing something you love that helps other people. She nodded solemnly, processing this with the gravity that children bring to concepts they're still learning to understand. "Your jewelry makes people happy. I see them write letters to you about it." She was right. The customer messages were my favorite part of the business. Women writing to tell me that my earrings had made them feel confident during a job interview. Mothers thanking me for creating something special for their daughters' birthdays. Brides asking for custom pieces that would carry meaning into their new marriages. These weren't just transactions, they were connections. I was creating something that mattered to people, even if my family couldn't see it. "That's exactly right, Emma," I told her, smoothing her dark hair back from her forehead. "And that's why we keep doing it, even when other people don't understand." As 2022 began, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I was going to stop trying to make my family understand and start focusing entirely on building something they couldn't ignore. Maya and I developed a 3-year expansion plan that felt impossibly ambitious. We were going to go from a small online business to a recognizable brand. We were going to scale production, develop new product lines, build partnerships with major retailers. Most importantly, we were going to do it quietly. No more progress reports at Sunday dinner. No more attempting to explain our growth strategies or market research. I was done seeking approval from people who'd already decided I was destined to fail. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened consistently. Month after month. Our numbers grew. Our social media following expanded. Influencers started featuring our pieces in their posts. Fashion bloggers wrote about our unique designs. Celebrity stylists began reaching out for collaboration opportunities. By the time 2023 arrived, Desert Rose Designs wasn't just my business anymore. It was becoming a brand that people recognized, sought out, recommended to their friends. And through it all, my family remained blissfully unaware of the empire I was building right under their noses. Every Sunday, I'd sit at that dinner table, listening to Michael talk about his latest client, Katie discuss her upcoming graduation, my parents share neighborhood gossip and retirement plans. And every Sunday, I'd smile and nod when they asked about my jewelry thing, giving vague, positive answers that satisfied their curiosity without revealing the scope of what I'd accomplished. They had no idea that the quiet, divorced daughter they worried about had become someone they'd never expected her to be. Someone who was about to prove that their definitions of success were far too small to contain what I'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me that in a family where appearances mattered so much, they'd completely missed the most impressive thing happening right in front of them. But that was about to change. Because sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who deserve the biggest surprise when you finally decide to show them exactly who you've become. The morning of Christmas Eve 2024, I sat in the conference room of one of Phoenix's most prestigious law firms, watching lawyers shuffle through papers that would change my life forever. The mahogany table reflected the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I couldn't help but think about how different this room felt from my small apartment where Desert Rose Designs had been born 5 years earlier. Marcus Wellington, the lead attorney for Lux Heritage Group, slid the final signature page across the polished surface. His silver pen caught the light as he explained the wire transfer process, the transition timeline, the non-disclosure agreements that would keep this acquisition quiet until their official announcement in February. $50 million. The number still felt surreal, like someone else's lottery ticket that had accidentally ended up in my purse. "Congratulations, Ms. Martinez," he said, shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that sealed billion-dollar deals. "You've built something truly remarkable." Maya squeezed my shoulder as we walked out of the building into the desert sunshine. We'd driven there together in my modest Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since my divorce, the same car my family always pointed to as evidence of my modest circumstances. Tomorrow, I could buy any car I wanted. Hell, I could buy a whole fleet of cars. But first, I had to get through Christmas dinner. "You're really not going to tell them?" Maya asked as we sat in the parking garage, both of us still processing what had just happened. I stared at the contract folder in my lap, thick with legal documents and life-changing signatures. "Not yet. You should have seen Michael's face. Last week when I showed up wearing that new turquoise necklace, he actually asked if I'd gotten it at a pawn shop." I laughed, but it came out sharper than I'd intended. They're so convinced I'm barely scraping by that they can't see what's right in front of them. The truth was, I'd been hiding my success so well that even I sometimes forgot how far I'd come. When you're used to being invisible, staying invisible becomes a survival mechanism. For the past 2 years, as Desert Rose Designs exploded into something beyond my wildest dreams, I'd maintained the same modest lifestyle, the same careful answers to their questions, the same deflection whenever the conversation turned to money. Maya understood the family dynamics better than anyone. She'd been there through all of it, had seen how their dismissal affected me, had watched me struggle with the decision to keep my success private. "Just promise me you'll eventually tell them," she said. "Not for them, for you. You deserve to have your accomplishments recognized." I promised, though I wasn't sure when that moment would come. Right now, sitting in that parking garage with a $50 million contract in my hands, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and melancholy. This should have been the moment I called my parents, shared the news with my siblings, celebrated with the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, I was planning how to get through another family dinner without revealing the most significant thing that had ever happened to me. That evening, I helped Emma wrap the last of the Christmas presents in our living room. She'd picked out gifts for everyone with the same careful consideration she brought to everything else. A book about famous trials for Uncle Michael, a soft scarf for Aunt Amanda, a small potted succulent for each of her grandparents. Simple gifts that showed thought and care, purchased with money from my business that they still considered a hobby. "Mama, are you excited about tomorrow?" Emma asked, carefully folding the corners of wrapping paper around her grandfather's gift. I watched her small fingers work with such precision and felt that familiar surge of pride and protectiveness. She was 8 now, old enough to understand family dynamics, young enough to still believe that love should be unconditional and fair. "I'm excited to spend time with you," I said honestly, "and I'm excited for you to see everyone." She looked up at me with those perceptive dark eyes. "But you don't seem excited. You seem worried excited." Sometimes her emotional intelligence amazed me. "I guess I am a little worried," I admitted. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about family time." She nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense. Like how I feel. Excited and nervous about school presentations? Exactly like that. I smoothed her hair back, marveling at how she could distill complex emotions into simple, understandable terms. But you know what? No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of us. Proud of what we've built together. She beamed at that, and I realized she understood more about our partnership than my parents ever had. Emma had been part of Desert Rose Designs from the beginning. She'd helped me photograph products, offered opinions on new designs, celebrated every milestone with genuine enthusiasm. In many ways, she was a better business partner than most adults I knew. The next morning, Christmas Day, started like every other holiday for the past 5 years. Emma and I exchanged gifts in our living room, just the two of us, before getting ready to head to my parents' house. She loved the art supplies I'd gotten her, immediately starting a drawing of the two of us in our matching desert rose earrings. I treasured the handmade jewelry box she'd created in her art class, complete with compartments for different types of pieces and a small mirror glued to the inside of the lid. "It's for your work jewelry," she explained proudly. "So you can see how pretty you look when you wear the things you make." I hugged her tight, thinking about how much more she supported my work than anyone else in my family ever had. This 8-year-old understood the value of what I'd built better than the adults who'd raised me. Getting dressed for the family dinner felt like putting on armor. I chose a simple red dress, nothing too flashy or expensive looking, paired with earrings from my latest collection. The jewelry was worth more than most people spent on their monthly rent. But to my family's untrained eyes, it would just look like more of Jessica's homemade accessories. Maya had offered to spend Christmas with us, giving me an excuse to skip the family gathering, but I'd declined. Running away felt like admitting defeat, and I wasn't ready to concede that ground. Besides, there was something almost poetic about sitting through their dismissal while carrying the secret of my success. It felt like being an undercover agent in my own life. The drive to my parents' house in Ahwatukee took 20 minutes, winding through suburban neighborhoods decorated with elaborate Christmas light displays. Emma pressed her face to the window, counting inflatable Santas and commenting on her favorite decorations. Her excitement was infectious, reminding me why these gatherings mattered despite the underlying tension. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. Same beige stucco exterior, same desert landscaping, same holiday wreath that my mother brought out every December. It represented stability and tradition, values that I'd always respected even when I felt stifled by them. Michael's Mercedes was already in the driveway, parked next to Katie's used Toyota. The visual reminder of the family hierarchy was subtle but unmistakable. Successful lawyer's luxury car, practical nursing student's economical choice, and my aging Honda Civic bringing up the rear. If only they knew that I could have bought both of their cars with my quarterly profit margins. Inside, the familiar sounds of family chaos greeted us. Amanda was setting the dining room table with my mother's good china, discussing her latest volunteer project with the enthusiasm of someone whose biggest problem was having too much free time. Katie was helping in the kitchen, sharing stories from her hospital rotations, while my mother clucked approvingly over her dedication to such a noble profession. Michael stood in the living room with my father, both holding beers and discussing the Cardinals' playoff chances with the authority of men who'd never played professional sports, but felt qualified to critique those who did. The scene was so perfectly predictable that I could have scripted it from memory. "Jess!" My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel and enveloping me in the kind of hug that felt both loving and slightly worried. "You look thin, honey. Are you eating enough?" The concern was genuine but loaded. In my mother's world, looking thin meant struggling financially, not being able to afford good food, sacrificing for Emma's sake. She couldn't see that I'd been working out regularly, eating better than I had in years, taking care of myself in ways that success had made possible. "I'm eating fine, Mom. We both are." I gestured to Emma, who'd already disappeared into the living room to show her uncle the drawing she'd made that morning. "Well, there's plenty here. I made your favorite green bean casserole." She led me toward the kitchen, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "And I wanted to talk to you about something. Your father's friend George knows someone at the school district. They're looking for administrative help, good benefits, regular hours. I thought maybe." I'd heard this conversation a dozen times in various forms. Well-meaning friends of the family who had connections, opportunities for stable employment, chances to give up the uncertainty of entrepreneurship for the security of a regular paycheck. They never seemed to understand that I didn't want to be rescued from my business. I wanted to be celebrated for what I'd built. "That's thoughtful, Mom. But things are going really well with Desert Rose. I'm not looking to change direction right now." She gave me that patient smile reserved for adult children who were still figuring out life. "I know you enjoy the jewelry making, sweetheart, but you have to think long term. Emma's getting older, expenses are going to increase. College isn't getting any cheaper. If only she knew that I'd already set aside enough money for Emma's college education to send her to any university in the country, with enough left over for graduate school and a down payment on her first house. If only she knew that long-term planning was exactly what had led me to this moment." "I understand your concerns," I said carefully, "but I'm more financially secure now than I've ever been." She patted my arm with the kind of maternal reassurance that somehow managed to be both comforting and condescending. "I'm sure it feels that way, honey. Just keep your options open, okay?" Dinner proceeded with the same familiar rhythms that had defined these gatherings for years. Michael dominated conversation with stories from his law practice, name-dropping clients and colleagues with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Amanda chimed in with updates about their social circle, charity events, weekend trips to their Sedona timeshare. Katie shared stories from nursing school that made my parents beam with pride. Their youngest daughter was following such a respectable path, choosing a career dedicated to helping others, planning to settle down with her boyfriend once she graduated. Everything about her choices reinforced their beliefs about what constituted a successful life. When the conversation turned to me, as it inevitably did, the tone shifted to something that felt like a gentle intervention. How was the jewelry business going? Was I making enough to cover expenses? Had I given any more thought to David's suggestion that we try counseling? Maybe it wasn't too late to work things out, give Emma the stable two-parent home she deserved. I answered their questions with the same vague positivity I'd perfected over the years. Business was good, sales were steady, Emma and I were doing well. I didn't mention the waiting list for custom pieces that stretched 3 months out. I didn't mention the celebrity stylist who'd featured our jewelry in a major fashion magazine. I didn't mention the wholesale orders that had required us to expand our production team again. Most importantly, I didn't mention the acquisition that had closed less than 24 hours earlier. Instead, I listened to Michael explain why my business model was unsustainable in the long term. "The problem with these online boutique things," he said, cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision, "is that they're totally dependent on trends. What happens when turquoise goes out of style? What happens when people stop buying handmade jewelry online?" He spoke with the authority of someone who'd never built anything from scratch, never risked his own money on an uncertain venture, never spent sleepless nights wondering if his decisions would provide for his child. His confidence was built on following predetermined paths, succeeding within existing systems, excelling at games other people had created. "That's a fair concern," I said, because agreeing was easier than explaining market diversification strategies or long-term brand development. I try to stay aware of trends and adapt accordingly. Amanda jumped in with her own analysis of the handmade jewelry market, based apparently on her observations while shopping at boutiques in Scottsdale. "I mean, it's cute and all, but most people want real jewelry for special occasions. Like, when Michael proposed, I didn't want something handmade. I wanted something from a real jewelry store. The comment stung more than it should have, partly because it dismissed my craftsmanship and partly because it revealed how little they understood about my customer base. Desert Rose Designs had created engagement rings, anniversary gifts, family, heirloom pieces that would be passed down for generations. Our work wasn't costume jewelry or temporary accessories. We were creating lasting art that happened to be wearable. But explaining that would have required them to see me as a serious artisan rather than someone playing with beads in her spare time. It would have required them to acknowledge that I'd built something meaningful, something valuable, something worth their respect. Emma, who'd been quietly listening to the adult conversation while eating her dinner, suddenly looked up from her plate. "Mama's jewelry is in stores now," she said matter-of-factly. "Real stores. We went to one last week and saw her necklaces on the wall." The table went quiet for a moment. This was news to them, evidence of expansion they hadn't expected. Could see the wheels turning as they tried to reconcile this information with their assumptions about my small-scale hobby business. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, her voice carefully enthusiastic. "Which stores?" I named a few of the boutiques that carried our line, trying to downplay the significance, even as I watched their expressions shift slightly. These weren't craft stores or farmers market booths. These were legitimate retail establishments in upscale shopping areas. "Huh," Michael said, and I could practically see him recalculating his assessment of my business. "That's actually pretty impressive. How'd you manage to get into retail?" For a moment, I considered telling them about the trade shows, the buyer meetings, the professional relationships Maya and I had cultivated over years of consistent growth. I considered explaining how we'd scaled production, developed wholesale, pricing strategies, built a brand that buyers actively sought out. Instead, I shrugged and said, "Just persistence, I guess, building relationships over time." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed a subtle shift in how they looked at me for the rest of the evening. Not quite respect, but a grudging acknowledgement that maybe my jewelry thing was more substantial than they'd assumed. It wasn't enough to change their fundamental beliefs about my choices, but it planted a seed of doubt about their certainty. Later, as we were clearing dishes and getting ready for dessert, Katie pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Jess, I have to ask, are you really doing okay financially? I mean, really okay?" The question caught me off guard, partly because it was more direct than my family usually was about money, and partly because it came from Katie, who'd always been the most supportive of my siblings. "Why do you ask?" She glanced around to make sure we were alone, then lowered her voice. "Because you never ask for help. Even when David left, even when things must have been really tight, you never asked any of us for anything. And now Emma's talking about stores, and you seem so, I don't know, confident? Different?" I looked at my youngest sister, this woman, who was building her own successful career in nursing, and realized she might be the only family member who'd actually been paying attention to my transformation over the past few years. "I'm doing better than okay," I said carefully. "The business has grown a lot more than I expected." "How much more?" The directness of the question surprised me. Katie had never pried into my finances before, had never questioned my vague updates about business progress. I thought about the contract sitting in my home office, about the bank account that would soon reflect a balance I'd never imagined possible, about the financial security that would let Emma and me live however we wanted for the rest of our lives. "A lot more," I said finally, "more than any of you realize." She studied my face with the same perceptive intensity that made her such a good nurse. "Jess, are you rich?" The question hung between us in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of family conversation from the dining room. Rich. The word felt strange applied to me. The girl who'd grown up sharing a bedroom with Katie, who'd married young and struggled through a difficult divorce, who'd been written off as the impractical dreamer of the family. "Define rich," I said. which wasn't really an answer, but wasn't a denial either. Katie's eyes widened slightly. "Oh my God, you are, aren't you? How rich!" I glanced toward the dining room, where our parents were serving dessert, and Michael was telling another story about his law practice. They had no idea that the conversation happening 10 feet away was about to change everything they thought they knew about their middle daughter. "Rich enough that I don't have to worry about Emma's college tuition," I said quietly. "Rich enough that I could retire tomorrow if I wanted to." Jesus, Jess. How rich? I took a deep breath, thinking about the non-disclosure agreements I'd signed that morning, about the careful timeline for announcing the acquisition, about the promise I'd made to keep the sale quiet until February. Rich enough that everything they think they know about my life is wrong, I whispered. Katie stared at me for a long moment, processing this information, trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the successful businesswoman standing in front of her. "Are you going to tell them?" I looked through the kitchen doorway, at my family, gathered around the dining room table, completely unaware that their assumptions about me were about to be shattered. "Eventually," I said, "but not tonight." She nodded slowly, understanding instinctively that this revelation would change family dynamics in ways none of us could predict. "Can I ask how much? Like, ballpark?" I thought about the acquisition, documents, about the wire transfer that would hit my account within 48 hours, about the number that still felt surreal even after signing papers all morning. "Let's just say it's enough to buy Michael's house, in cash, without touching my other investments." Katie's face went pale. "Holy shit, Jess." "Language," I said automatically, the way we'd been trained to correct each other since childhood. But I was smiling as I said it, enjoying her shock, savoring this moment of recognition from at least one family member who was beginning to understand what I'd accomplished. "Does Maya know?" "Maya helped me build it. She's been my business partner for 3 years now." "And nobody else knows? Not Mom and Dad? Not Michael?" I shook my head. They've been so convinced I was barely getting by that they never bothered to look closer. It was easier to let them believe what they wanted to believe than to constantly defend my choices. Katie leaned against the kitchen counter, still processing. "But Jess, this is huge. This is life-changing. How can you just sit there and let them worry about you? Let them think you need their help?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for months as my success became impossible to hide from myself, even if I was still hiding it from them. "Because," I said slowly, "they had 5 years to show interest in what I was building. 5 years to ask real questions, to take me seriously, to support what I was doing instead of constantly suggesting I should be doing something else. They chose to see me as the family failure, and I got tired of trying to change their minds." She was quiet for a moment, understanding the hurt behind my words. Katie had always been the most empathetic of my siblings, the one who noticed when I felt left out or overlooked. "But they love you, Jess. They're going to feel terrible when they find out they've been treating you like you were struggling when you were actually what? Actually succeeding beyond their wildest dreams? Actually proving that their advice was wrong? Actually building something they said was impossible?" My voice had gotten sharper than I intended, and Katie looked around nervously to make sure our parents couldn't hear us. "I'm not saying you don't have a right to be hurt," she said quietly. "I'm just saying that when this comes out, it's going to change everything. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the conversation I'd had with Maya in the parking garage, about the promise I'd made to eventually tell my family the truth. The acquisition had made that inevitable. Eventually, the sale would be announced publicly. Eventually, reporters would want to interview the woman who'd built a $50 million company from her spare bedroom. Eventually, my success would be too big to hide. "I think," I said carefully, "that I'm ready to stop pretending to be smaller than I am to make other people comfortable." Katie reached over and squeezed my hand. Good for you. And for what? It's worth. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my parents' and Michael's dismissal that I'd forgotten Katie had also been silent during those years when I was building something extraordinary. Her support now felt like a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. Thank you, I said, and meant it. That means more than you know. We rejoined the family for dessert, but the conversation with Katie had shifted something fundamental in my perspective. For the first time in years, I felt like I had an ally in that house, someone who saw me clearly and was proud of what I'd accomplished. As we ate my mother's famous apple pie and listened to Michael's analysis of current real estate trends, I found myself studying each family member with new eyes. Soon, very soon, they would all have to reconcile their assumptions about me with the reality of who I'd become. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. Emma helped me carry dishes to the kitchen, chattering about the new art supplies she'd gotten for Christmas and her plans for tomorrow when we'd have the whole day to ourselves. Listening to her enthusiasm, watching her easy confidence, I realized she'd never doubted my success the way the adults in my family had. To her, I'd always been someone capable of amazing things. Maybe it was time for the rest of them to see me through her eyes instead of through the lens of their own limited expectations. As we got ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside for one last concerned conversation about my future plans, my financial security, my need to think practically about Emma's needs. I listened with patience I wouldn't have had 6 months earlier, understanding that her worry came from love, even if it was built on completely incorrect assumptions. I appreciate your concern, Mom, I said, hugging her goodbye. But I promise you, Emma and I are going to be just fine. She held me a little longer than usual, and I wondered if she sensed something different about me, some new confidence she couldn't quite identify. I love you, sweetheart, she said. I just want you to be happy and secure. I am, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. I really, truly am. The drive home was quiet, Emma dozing in the back seat while I processed the evening's conversations. Katie's recognition felt like a preview of what was coming, a glimpse of how the family dynamic would shift once my success became undeniable. But I also realized that their eventual acknowledgement of my achievements wouldn't erase the years of dismissal and doubt. It wouldn't change the fact that they'd been more interested in rescuing me from my choices than celebrating my accomplishments. Success had given me financial freedom, but it had also given me something more valuable: the clarity to see relationships as they really were, not as I wished they could be. Back home, I tucked Emma into bed and sat in my home office, staring at the acquisition contracts that would change our lives forever. Tomorrow, the wire transfer would make me one of the wealthiest women in Arizona. Next month, the public announcement would make my success impossible to ignore. But tonight, I was still just Jessica Martinez, the underestimated middle child who'd built an empire while her family worried about her ability to pay rent. The transformation was complete, even if they couldn't see it yet. Soon, very soon, they would have no choice but to see me as I really was. Not the family member who needed saving, but the one who'd saved herself and built something extraordinary in the process. The week between Christmas and New Year's felt like living in a suspended reality. The wire transfer had cleared on December 27th, and seeing that balance in my checking account made me dizzy every time I opened the banking app. $50 million. Even after taxes and legal fees, the number was incomprehensible. I'd gone from worrying about Emma's school supply costs to being able to fund an entire school district. But the most surreal part wasn't the money itself. It was how normal everything else remained. Emma still wanted her usual breakfast of chocolate chip pancakes on Saturday mornings. I still folded laundry while watching Netflix. We still played board games on the living room floor and argued about bedtimes. The only difference was that now I could afford to buy the entire toy store if she asked. but she was still perfectly content with her art supplies and the secondhand books we'd collected over the years. Maya came over on Thursday evening, bringing Thai takeout and a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for this moment. We sat on my modest couch in my modest apartment, eating pad thai out of cardboard containers while discussing what $50 million actually meant in practical terms. "You could buy a mansion in Paradise Valley," she said, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. "Look at this one. 6 bedrooms, infinity pool, mountain views. It's only $12 million. Only $12 million. The phrase would have been absurd a week ago, but now it represented less than a quarter of my net worth. I could buy that house with cash and still have enough left over to live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever working again. I don't want a mansion," I said, surprising myself with how quickly I'd reached that conclusion. "I like our life here. Emma's settled, she has friends at school, we have routines that work." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you just became one of the wealthiest women in Arizona, and you want to stay in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe?" When she put it like that, it did sound ridiculous. But the truth was, wealth hadn't changed what I valued. If anything, it had clarified what really mattered. Emma's happiness, our relationship, the sense of accomplishment that came from building something meaningful. The mansion in Paradise Valley was beautiful, but it wouldn't make us any happier than we already were. "Maybe we'll upgrade eventually," I said. "But right now, I want to focus on what comes next for the business. The acquisition includes a consulting contract, and I'm thinking about starting something new." Maya grinned. "Already planning your next empire?" "Actually, yes. I'd been thinking about this for months, even before the acquisition talks began. There are so many talented artists and creators who struggle with the business side of things. People like I was 5 years ago, with great products but no idea how to scale or market or manage finances. What if we created a platform to help them?" The idea had been percolating since I'd started getting messages from other jewelry makers asking for advice. Young women who'd seen my success and wanted to know how I'd grown from Etsy shop to major brand. Single mothers trying to build businesses around their kids' schedules. Artists who created beautiful work but couldn't figure out how to turn it into sustainable income. "Like a mentorship program?" Maya asked. "More than that. A full-service platform. Business coaching, marketing support, financial planning, even microloans for people who need capital to grow. Everything I wish I'd had access to when I was starting out." Maya's eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm I'd seen when she first helped me set up my Etsy shop. "That's brilliant, Jess. And now you have the resources to actually make it happen." The resources. That was the game changer. I'd spent 5 years bootstrapping Desert Rose Designs, reinvesting every penny back into growth, making do with secondhand equipment and borrowed expertise. Now I could fund an entirely new venture without worrying about cash flow or investor approval. I could build something that prioritized impact over immediate profit. "I've already started reaching out to some potential partners," I said. "There's a woman in Tucson who runs business workshops for female entrepreneurs. And remember that accountant who helped us with the acquisition paperwork? She's interested in developing financial literacy programs specifically for creative businesses." Maya leaned back against the couch cushions, studying me with admiration. "You know what I love about this? Your family thinks you got lucky with one business, but you're already building the next one. They have no idea who you really are." She was right. My family's perception of my success was so limited that they couldn't imagine I might be capable of replicating it, expanding it, using it as a foundation for something even bigger. To them, Desert Rose Designs was a fluke, a happy accident that happened to work out despite my impractical choices. They couldn't see the strategic thinking, the calculated risks, the systematic approach to growth that had made the success possible. "Speaking of family," Maya said carefully, "have you thought about how you're going to tell them about the acquisition?" I'd been avoiding that question, even though it was becoming more urgent every day. The non-disclosure agreement would expire in February, and Lux Heritage Group planned to announce the acquisition as part of their quarterly earnings report. Once that happened, the news would be public, and my secret would be impossible to maintain. I keep thinking about the right moment, I said. The right way to explain it so they understand it's not just luck. Jess, Maya said gently, I don't think there's a way to explain $50 million that won't blow their minds. Maybe that's okay. Maybe they need to have their minds blown. She had a point. I'd spent so many years trying to manage their expectations, to make my success palatable and non-threatening. But there was nothing palatable about selling a business. For $50 million, it was going to shock them no matter how I presented it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On New Year's Eve, my mother called to invite Emma and me to their traditional family brunch on January 2nd. Just close family, she said. A nice way to start the new year together. Close family. The phrase carried weight in our household, representing the core group of people who supposedly knew each other's real circumstances, who shared important news and supported each other through challenges. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been hiding the most important news of my life from exactly these people. We'll be there, I said, making the decision impulsively. Actually, Mom, I have some news to share with everyone. Something important. I could hear the immediate concern in her voice. Is everything okay? You're not sick, are you? The assumption that my news would be negative said everything about their expectations for my life. No, Mom, it's good news. Really good news. Oh, thank goodness, what is it? Are you and David talking again? Even now, even after 4 years of successful independence, she still thought the best possible news would be reconciliation with my ex-husband. The idea that I might have accomplished something significant on my own didn't seem to occur to her. It's not about David, I said. It's about the business. I'll explain everything at brunch. The 2 days between that phone call and the family gathering felt like the longest waiting period of my life. I rehearsed different ways to share the news, practiced explaining the acquisition process, prepared for their various reactions. Emma, meanwhile, was excited about the prospect of a family announcement without understanding its significance. Are you going to tell them about the money? She asked while we were getting dressed for brunch. I'm going to tell them about the business, I said carefully, about how well it's been doing. She nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Will they be surprised? Very surprised, I said, which might have been the understatement of the century. The drive to my parents' house felt different this time. Instead of the usual anxiety about being judged or dismissed, I felt a strange calm. The secret I'd been carrying for a week was about to be shared, and whatever happened, next, at least I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. Everyone was already gathered in the dining room when we arrived. Michael and Amanda sat at one end of the table, discussing their plans for a European vacation in the spring. Katie was helping my mother serve coffee and pastries, talking about her upcoming graduation from nursing school. My father was reading the newspaper, occasionally commenting on articles about the local economy. The scene was so perfectly ordinary that it felt surreal to think I was about to shatter their assumptions about our family dynamics. Jess! My mother hugged me warmly, then immediately launched into her usual concerns. You look tired, honey. Are you sleeping enough? I know running a business can be stressful. Running a business. Even her well-intentioned support revealed how little she understood about what I'd built. Desert Rose Designs wasn't just a business anymore. It was a brand, a company with employees and wholesale accounts and retail partnerships. But to her, it was still something I ran the way someone runs a lemonade stand. I'm sleeping fine, Mom. Actually, I've been sleeping better than I have in years. She looked puzzled by that response, as if good sleep was incompatible with entrepreneurship. Well, that's wonderful, dear. Come sit down. I made those blueberry muffins you used to love. The gathering proceeded with typical family rhythm. Michael shared updates about his latest cases, carefully avoiding specifics due to client confidentiality, but managing to convey the impression of important, high-stakes work. Amanda discussed her volunteer activities with the Junior League, their upcoming charity gala, the new art they'd purchased for their living room. Katie talked about her clinical rotations, the patients she'd helped, the doctors who'd praised her bedside manner. My parents beamed with pride as she described her job offers from different hospitals, the opportunities she'd have once she graduated. Then, inevitably, the conversation turned to me. "So, Jess," my father said, setting down his coffee cup, "how's the jewelry business going? Still keeping you busy?" This was my moment, the transition I'd been planning for days. I took a deep breath and looked around the table at the faces of the people who'd raised me, supported me, and consistently underestimated me. "Actually, Dad, that's what I wanted to talk to everyone about. The business has been going really well, better than I think any of you realize." Michael leaned back in his chair with that familiar expression of polite interest. "That's great. Jess, are you thinking about expanding? Maybe opening a storefront?" His question revealed how small he still imagined my operation to be. A storefront, as if retail expansion was the pinnacle of entrepreneurial ambition. "Not exactly," I said. "Actually, I've been in negotiations for the past several months with a company called Lux Heritage Group. They're a luxury conglomerate that owns several high-end jewelry and fashion brands." The table went quiet. Even Emma, who'd been coloring quietly beside me, looked up with interest. "Negotiations for what?" Katie asked. "They wanted to acquire Desert Rose Designs. They approached me last fall about buying the company." My mother's face showed immediate concern. "Oh, honey, I hope you didn't get taken advantage of. These big companies can be very manipulative with small business owners." Small business owners. The phrase stung, not because there was anything wrong with small businesses, but because it revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood what I'd built. Desert Rose Designs hadn't been a small business for 2 years. I had excellent legal representation, I said. The same law firm that handles mergers and acquisitions for major corporations. They made sure the deal was fair. "What kind of deal?" Michael asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Are they licensing your designs? Hiring you as a consultant?" "They bought the company," I said simply. "The entire business. All assets, intellectual property, customer lists, inventory, everything." The silence that followed was different. From the polite quiet that had greeted my earlier statement, this was the silence of people trying to process information that didn't fit their expectations. Amanda was the first to speak. "Bought it for how much?" I looked around the table one more time, at these people who'd spent 5 years assuming I was barely scraping by, who'd offered me jobs and financial advice and gentle suggestions about finding more stable work. $50 million, I said. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. My mother gasped audibly. Katie dropped her fork. Michael's coffee cup hit the table with a sharp clink. Amanda stared at me like I'd just announced I was from another planet. 50 million? My father's voice was barely above a whisper. $50 million, I confirmed. The deal closed last week. The silence that followed was the most profound quiet I'd ever experienced in that house. It stretched on for what felt like minutes, each family member processing the information at their own pace, trying to reconcile this news with everything they thought they knew about my life. Finally, Michael found his voice. "Jess, are you saying you're a millionaire?" "I'm saying I just sold my business for $50 million, I repeated, because the number was the only fact that mattered right now. "But," my mother looked around the table as if seeking confirmation that this conversation was really happening. "But you drive that old Honda. You live in that little apartment. You never said." "I never said because you never asked," I said gently. "Not really. You asked if I was making enough to get by, if I was managing okay financially. You never asked if I was successful, Katie was shaking her head slowly. Jess, I knew you were doing well, but $50 million? How long has the business been worth that much? The valuation has been building over several years, I said. Last year, we generated over $2 million in revenue. The year before that, it was $800,000. The growth has been consistent, but I kept it quiet because I paused, trying to find the right words to explain years of feeling invisible and undervalued without sounding bitter or accusatory. Because you all seemed so convinced I was struggling, I finished. It became easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to constantly defend my choices. My father was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. $2 million in revenue? Jesus, Jess. I make $60,000 a year selling insurance. The comparison hung in the air, stark and undeniable. My hobby business had generated more income in a single year than he'd made in his entire career. And you did this all yourself? Amanda asked, her voice filled with something that might have been awe or disbelief. I had help, I said. Maya has been my business partner for 3 years. We've built an incredible team. But yes, I started it from nothing in my spare bedroom. Michael was studying me with the same intense focus he probably used when analyzing legal documents. Jess, this is extraordinary. I had no idea. None of us had any idea. I know, I said simply. But why didn't you tell us? My mother's voice was small, confused. We're your family. We love you. We would have been so proud. That question hung in the room like a challenge. Why hadn't I told them? Why had I hidden success instead of celebrating it? The answer was complicated, built on years of subtle dismissal and gentle discouragement, but it was also painfully simple. Because, I said carefully, every time I tried to share good news about the business, you changed the subject or suggested I should be doing something else. When I told you we'd gotten into retail stores, Dad suggested I should get a teaching certificate. When I mentioned hiring employees, Mom asked if I'd considered going back to school. You weren't interested in my success. You were interested in rescuing me from my choices. The accusation landed heavily. I could see each of them, reviewing past conversations, remembering moments when they'd offered unsolicited advice or gentle corrections to my path. We were just worried about you, my mother said quietly. About your security, your future. I understand that, I said. But your worry was based on assumptions that weren't true. You assumed I was struggling because I didn't fit your definition of success. You never considered that I might be building something significant. Katie reached across the table and took my hand. Jess, I'm so sorry. We should have paid more attention. We should have asked better questions. Her apology felt genuine, and I squeezed her hand gratefully. Katie had always been the most perceptive of my siblings, the one most likely to see past surface appearances. I'm not angry, I said, which was mostly true. I'm just tired of pretending to be smaller than I am to make everyone else comfortable. Michael was still processing the financial implications. $50 million, he said again, as if repeating the number would make it more comprehensible. Jess, you're wealthier than everyone in this room combined. You're wealthier than everyone we know. The statement was accurate but uncomfortable. Wealth had never been a competition in our family, partly because none of us had ever had enough money for it to matter. Now, suddenly, the balance had shifted so dramatically that it changed everything. What are you going to do with it? Amanda asked. The money, I mean. I'd been thinking about that question for weeks, ever since the acquisition talks began. The practical answer was that I'd invest most of it, maybe buy a better house, definitely set up Emma's college fund and then some. But the deeper answer was more complicated. I'm going to use it to help other people build what I built, I said. There are so many talented entrepreneurs who just need resources and support to scale their businesses. I want to create a platform that provides that. My father was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between pride and bewilderment, as if he was meeting his daughter for the first time. "You're really going to start another business?" he asked. "I'm going to start several businesses," I said. "I'm going to invest in other people's dreams. I'm going to prove that what I did wasn't luck or a fluke. It was skill and strategy and hard work." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Less shocked, more contemplative. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about everything they'd believed about me being wrong. Emma, who'd been listening to the adult conversation with the patience of a child accustomed to being included in business discussions, suddenly looked up from her coloring book. "Mama," she said, "can we tell them about the other thing now?" I looked down at her, confused. "What other thing, sweetheart?" "About the magazine people who want to take pictures of you, and the TV show that called." The adults at the table turned to stare at me again, and I realized Emma had just revealed the next wave of consequences I hadn't even mentioned yet. "What magazine people?" Katie asked. "What TV show?" Michael demanded. I sighed, realizing this conversation was far from over. "When a business sells for $50 million, it attracts media attention," I said. "Especially when it's a woman-owned company that started from nothing. I've been getting calls from reporters, business magazines, a few television producers. They want to interview you?" My mother's voice was filled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "They want to tell the story of how Desert Rose Designs became successful," I said. "The rags to riches angle, the single mother entrepreneur, the business built from a spare bedroom. It's the kind of story that sells magazines and gets television ratings." Amanda was staring at me with something approaching awe. "Jess, you're going to be famous." "I'm going to be visible," I corrected, which is different. And honestly, it's terrifying. That was the truth I hadn't shared with anyone yet. The success was thrilling, but the attention that came with it felt overwhelming. I'd spent 5 years building a business while maintaining my privacy, keeping my personal life separate from my professional achievements. Now that separation was about to disappear entirely. "Are you going to do the interviews?" Katie asked. "Some of them," I said. "My lawyer thinks it's good for the brand, even though I don't own it anymore. And honestly, I think it might be important for other women to see that this kind of success is possible." My father was shaking his head slowly. "I can't believe this is happening. My daughter, on television, talking about her $50 million business." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, but it was complicated by years of missed opportunities to show that support. I appreciated it, but I also couldn't forget how long it had taken him to get there. "The first interview is next week," I said. "Forbes wants to feature me in their Women Entrepreneurs issue." "Forbes?" Michael looked like he might fall out of his chair. "Jess, Forbes is—" "I know what Forbes is," I said calmly. "I've been reading it for years, studying how other entrepreneurs built their businesses." That detail seemed to surprise him more than anything else I'd shared. The idea that I'd been systematically educating myself about business strategy while they assumed I was just playing with jewelry. "What else don't we know about you?" Amanda asked, and for the first time, her tone held genuine curiosity rather than condescension. "A lot," I said honestly. "But that's partly because you never asked, and partly because I got tired of having my accomplishments minimized." The conversation continued for another hour, with each family member asking questions, sharing their shock, trying to process this new reality. My parents wanted to know about the business operations, how I'd managed growth, whether I'd really been financially secure all those times they'd worried about me. Michael, his lawyer instincts fully engaged, wanted details about the acquisition structure, the legal representation, the due diligence process. He seemed almost personally offended that I'd navigated a complex corporate transaction without consulting him. Katie was most interested in the human side of the story. How had I balanced single motherhood with building a business? What had been the hardest parts? How had I found the confidence to take such big risks? Amanda, perhaps surprisingly, was fascinated by the marketing and branding aspects. How had I built a customer base? What role had social media played? How had I transitioned from handmade to mass production while maintaining quality? Through it all, Emma continued coloring, occasionally adding details to the conversation when adults forgot to include something important. She was completely comfortable with the discussion, having been part of the business journey from the beginning, and her ease with the subject matter was probably the most powerful evidence of how normal this success had become for us. By the time we left, the family dynamic had shifted in ways that would take months to fully understand. I was no longer the struggling single mother who needed gentle guidance and financial worry. I was the family's most successful member, the one who'd achieved something none of them had imagined possible. The drive home was quiet, Emma falling asleep in her car seat while I processed what had just happened. For 5 years, I'd carried the weight of their assumptions about my life, their concern about my choices, their well-intentioned but misguided advice about finding stability. Now that weight was gone, replaced by something more complex but ultimately more honest. They finally saw me as I really was, not as they'd assumed I should be. Maya called that evening, eager to hear how the revelation had gone. "So," she said, without preamble, "how did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect," I said. "Shock, disbelief, a lot of questions about why I didn't tell them sooner." "And how do you feel?" I thought about that question for a long moment. How did I feel? Relieved, certainly. Vindicated, absolutely. But also strangely empty, as if the secret I'd been carrying had become part of my identity, and now I had to figure out who I was without it. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free to be exactly who I am." "Good," Maya said, "because tomorrow, you're going to start changing the world." She was right. The acquisition had given me resources, but the revelation had given me something even more valuable: permission to be ambitious without apology, to build something significant without hiding it, to show Emma that success wasn't something to be ashamed of or diminished. The next phase of my life was going to be lived in full color, not in the muted tones I'd used to keep other people comfortable. And that prospect, while terrifying, was also thrilling beyond measure. The Forbes interview happened on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 weeks after the family revelation. The journalist, Sarah Chen, met me at a sleek downtown Phoenix cafe that specialized in artisanal coffee and hosted power meetings between deals. I'd chosen it deliberately, neutral, territory that reflected my new status without seeming pretentious to anyone who might recognize me. Sarah was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why Forbes had sent her to cover my story. She'd done her homework, asking detailed questions about Desert Rose designs, growth trajectory, the challenges of scaling a handmade business, the decision to accept acquisition offers over venture capital funding. "What strikes me most about your story," she said, sipping her oat milk latte, "is how quietly you built this empire. Most entrepreneurs in your position would have been seeking media attention, building personal brands, leveraging publicity for growth. You did the opposite." I stirred my coffee slowly, thinking about how to explain 5 years of deliberate invisibility. "I wasn't hiding from success," I said finally. "I was protecting it. When you're a single mother building something unconventional, there's a lot of pressure to prove yourself constantly. I found it more productive to focus on the work itself rather than convincing people it was legitimate." She nodded, making notes on her tablet. "But that approach must have been isolating. Who did you turn to for advice or support?" Maya Chen, my business partner, was absolutely essential. And honestly, my daughter Emma has been my most honest consultant from the beginning. She has this way of cutting through complexity and telling me what really matters. Speaking of Emma, Sarah said. "How do you balance entrepreneurship with single motherhood? That's something our readers always want to understand." I thought about all the nights I'd worked after Emma went to bed, all the business calls I'd taken while she was at school, all the times I'd involved her in business decisions because I didn't have anyone else to bounce ideas off of. I think the traditional advice about work-life balance assumes you have a traditional support system, I said. When you're doing it alone, you have to be more creative. Emma grew up understanding that mommy's work was important, not just because it paid our bills, but because it was something I was passionate about. She's been part of the journey from the beginning. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from manufacturing challenges to customer retention strategies to the emotional impact of the acquisition. Sarah asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of both business and personal dimensions of my story. As we wrapped up, she asked one final question that caught me off guard. What would you say to other women who are building businesses while dealing with skepticism from their own families? I paused, thinking about the years of gentle discouragement, the well-meaning advice to find something more stable, the assumption that my ambitions were unrealistic dreams rather than strategic plans. I'd say that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who have the hardest time seeing you differently than they always have, I said. That doesn't make their skepticism right, but it doesn't make their love less real either. The key is learning to validate your own vision without needing their approval to pursue it. The article published 3 weeks later with the headline, "From Spare Bedroom to 50 Million, How Jessica Martinez Built a Jewelry Empire," while everyone assumed she was struggling. The accompanying photo showed me in my workspace, surrounded by jewelry displays and design sketches, looking confident and professional in a way that felt both authentic and surreal. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning with interview requests from local television stations. My email inbox filled with messages from other entrepreneurs, aspiring business owners, and women who saw their own struggles reflected in my story. But the most meaningful reaction came from Emma, who found the magazine at the grocery store and proudly showed it to the cashier. "That's my mom," she announced to anyone within hearing distance. "She's in Forbes because she's really good at business." The pride in her voice was worth more than any professional recognition I could have received. Within days of the article's publication, my parents called to invite me to dinner. Not the usual Sunday family gathering, but a special occasion. They wanted to plan specifically to celebrate my success. The reversal felt surreal. After years of gentle concern about my choices, they now wanted to showcase my achievements. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my mother said over the phone. "We always knew you were special, but this is it's incredible what you've accomplished." I accepted the invitation graciously, understanding that their pride was genuine, even if it had taken concrete proof to surface. People process change at their own pace, and my family was no exception. The dinner was held at Michael's house in Scottsdale, a gesture that felt significant given his position as the family's previous standard-bearer for professional success. Amanda had prepared an elaborate meal, and they'd even arranged for a photographer to capture what they called a historic family moment. The conversation was entirely different from our usual gatherings. Instead of polite questions about whether I was managing okay financially, they asked detailed questions about business strategy, marketing approaches, and future investment plans. Michael wanted to understand the legal structure of the acquisition. Katie was curious about the challenges of scaling production while maintaining quality. Even my father, who'd spent years suggesting I find something more stable, now wanted advice about retirement planning and investment strategies. The shift in dynamic was everything I'd imagined it would be, but it also felt strange and slightly hollow. Their respect for my achievements was gratifying, but it couldn't retroactively change the years when their support had been conditional on my fitting their expectations. Emma, oblivious to the family politics, simply enjoyed having everyone's attention focused on positive conversation about our life. She showed her aunt and uncle the new art supplies she'd bought with her business consultant allowance, a small weekly payment I'd started giving her for her genuine contributions to product development and marketing ideas. "Emma's going to be an entrepreneur just like her mom," Amanda said, watching my daughter explain her latest artwork with the same enthusiasm I brought to business presentations. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she'll be something completely different. The important thing is that she'll know she can build whatever life she wants." That evening, as we drove home through the quiet Scottsdale streets, Emma asked me a question that cut right to the heart of everything I'd been processing. "Mama, are you happier now that everyone knows about your success?" I thought about that question for several minutes, watching the desert landscape pass by our windows. Was I happier? The recognition was satisfying, certainly. The financial security was liberating. The ability to be completely honest about my achievements felt like a weight lifted. But happiness hadn't come from their acknowledgement. It had come from building something meaningful, from proving to myself that I was capable of more than anyone had imagined, from creating a life that aligned with my values and priorities. "I'm happier because I don't have to pretend anymore," I said finally. "Not because they finally see me, but because I can finally be completely myself." She nodded with the wisdom of a child who'd grown up watching her mother navigate complex adult situations. "That makes sense. Pretending is exhausting." Over the following months, the media attention continued. I appeared on 3 different television shows, participated in 2 podcasts focused on women entrepreneurs, and was invited to speak at a conference for small business owners. Each appearance reinforced the same themes: the importance of believing in your vision even when others don't, the power of quiet persistence over flashy self-promotion, and the reality that success rarely looks like what people expect. But the most meaningful development was the launch of my new venture, the platform I'd envisioned to help other entrepreneurs scale their businesses. Maya and I called it Rise Collective, and within 6 months of launching, we'd provided business coaching to over 200 women-owned companies across the Southwest. The work felt like a natural extension of everything I'd learned building Desert Rose Designs, but with the added satisfaction of helping others avoid some of the mistakes I'd made along the way. We offered everything from basic business plan development to advanced marketing strategies, from financial planning workshops to direct microloan funding for promising startups. One of our first success stories was a woman named Patricia from Tucson, who'd been making handmade soaps in her kitchen for 3 years. When she came to us, she was making about $500 a month and considering giving up because she couldn't figure out how to grow beyond local farmers markets. Within 8 months of working with our coaching team, she'd developed an online presence, established wholesale relationships with 6 boutique stores, and was generating $4,000 in monthly revenue. More importantly, she'd learned to see herself as a legitimate business owner rather than someone with an expensive hobby. "You changed my whole mindset," she told me during one of our quarterly check-in calls. "I used to apologize for charging what my products were worth. Now I price confidently because I understand my value." That conversation reminded me why the years of family skepticism had been so damaging. It wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about how external doubt can undermine internal confidence, how constantly having to defend your choices can make you question your own judgment. The entrepreneurs we worked with through Rise Collective faced the same challenges I'd encountered. Family members who didn't understand their business models, friends who questioned their decision to take risks, partners who wanted them to choose more conventional paths. Our coaching sessions often spent as much time on mindset development as on business strategy, helping women learn to trust their instincts even when their support systems expressed doubt. Emma, now 9, had become an unofficial mascot for Rise Collective, sometimes sitting in on video calls with entrepreneurs who were juggling business development with parenting responsibilities. Her presence reminded everyone that building something meaningful while raising children wasn't just possible. It could be an advantage. Kids see things differently, she told a group of entrepreneur mothers during one memorable session. Sometimes grown-ups make things too complicated. Her simple observation led to a breakthrough discussion about customer communication strategies that resulted in significant revenue growth for 3 of the participating businesses. By the end of the year, Rise Collective had facilitated over $2 million in combined revenue growth for our client companies. We'd provided $300,000 in direct microloan funding, most of which was being repaid ahead of schedule. More importantly, we'd helped shift the narrative for dozens of women who'd been told their business ideas were impractical, unrealistic, or too risky. The work felt like the completion of something that had started 5 years earlier when I'd made my first Etsy sale. Back then, I'd proven to myself that my creative work had value. Now, I was helping other women make the same discovery about their own talents and ambitions. The transformation in my relationship with my family continued to evolve throughout that year. My parents had gone from gentle concern about my financial stability to active bragging about my success in their social circles. Michael had started referring business contacts to me when they needed strategic consulting. Katie frequently asked for advice about her own career development as she transitioned from nursing school to her first hospital position. The change was gratifying, but also bittersweet. Their pride felt genuine, but it had required extraordinary success to earn their respect for choices they could have supported much earlier. I appreciated their enthusiasm while also protecting myself from becoming too dependent on their validation. The most surprising development was Amanda's growing interest in entrepreneurship. She'd spent years as a traditional corporate wife, focusing on volunteer work and social activities while Michael built his law practice. But watching my success had sparked something in her that she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about starting a consulting business," she told me during a family dinner in December. "Event planning for corporate clients. I have all this experience from volunteer work, and I think there's a real market for it." I offered to connect her with some of the business development resources at Rise Collective, which led to regular conversations about marketing strategies, pricing models, and client acquisition approaches. Working with Amanda felt like coming full circle, helping a family member who'd once questioned my business choices now develop her own entrepreneurial vision. Emma's 10th birthday party that year was a celebration that perfectly captured how much our lives had changed. Instead of the modest gatherings we'd had in years past, we rented a small event space and invited not just family, but also some of the entrepreneurs from Rise Collective and their children. The guest list included a mixture of successful business owners, supportive family members, and kids who were growing up watching their mothers build companies and chase ambitious dreams. The conversations ranged from quarterly profit margins to soccer team schedules, from investment strategies to homework challenges. Watching Emma move easily between groups, discussing art techniques with one entrepreneur's daughter, explaining business concepts to her cousins, showing her grandparents the thank you cards we'd received from Rise Collective clients, I realized she was growing up with a completely different understanding of what was possible for women than I'd had at her age. "She's so confident," Katie observed, watching Emma present a slideshow about our latest Rise Collective success stories to the assembled adults. "She just assumes everyone will be interested in her ideas." That confidence was exactly what I'd hoped to give her. Not just financial security, but the bone-deep knowledge that her thoughts and ambitions mattered, that she could build whatever life she envisioned, that other people's limitations didn't have to become her limitations. As the party wound down and we cleaned up the event space, Maya pulled me aside for a moment of reflection. "Do you remember that conversation we had in the parking garage after you signed the acquisition papers?" she asked. "When you said you weren't sure if you were ready for people to see you as successful?" I remembered that conversation vividly. The mixture of triumph and uncertainty, the strange feeling of achieving something I'd worked toward for years while not being entirely sure how to handle the recognition that came with it. "I remember feeling like I was living someone else's life," I said. Maya smiled. And now? I looked around the room at the evidence of everything we'd built together. Rise collective entrepreneurs packing up business cards they'd exchanged with potential collaborators. Emma organizing leftover party supplies with the same systematic approach she brought to our business inventory. My parents helping Amanda research business license requirements on their phones. Now it feels like exactly the life I was meant to build, I said. The success hadn't just changed my financial situation or my family's perception of me. It had changed my understanding of what was possible, not just for me, but for the women around me who were building their own versions of unconventional success. 3 years later, as I write this story, Rise Collective has helped over 800 women-owned businesses achieve significant growth. We've provided more than $5 million in microloan funding, facilitated countless mentorship relationships, and created a community of entrepreneurs who support each other's ambitious visions. Emma is now 12, and she started her own small business selling handmade bookmarks and greeting cards at local craft fairs. She prices her products confidently, tracks her profits meticulously, and reinvests her earnings into art supplies and business expansion. More importantly, she does all of this with the assumption that her ideas have value and her ambitions deserve support. My relationship with my family has settled into something healthier and more honest than it was before. We've never explicitly discussed the years when their skepticism affected my confidence, but their current enthusiasm for my work feels like an acknowledgement that they underestimated me for too long. Michael has become one of Rise Collective's legal advisors, providing pro bono services to entrepreneurs who need contract review or business structure guidance. Katie refers hospital colleagues to our healthcare entrepreneur programs. My parents volunteer at our quarterly workshops, helping with registration and logistics, while proudly introducing themselves as Jessica's parents. Their support means more now because it's based on understanding rather than obligation, on respect for what I've built rather than concern about what I might be lacking. The most meaningful part of this journey has been watching other women discover their own capacity for extraordinary achievement. Every month, we celebrate new milestones from Rise Collective Entrepreneurs, a catering business that landed a major corporate contract, a consulting firm that expanded into 3 new markets, a retail startup that achieved profitability ahead of projections. Each success story reminds me that the quiet revolution I started in my spare bedroom wasn't just about building desert rose designs. It was about proving that women who are dismissed, underestimated, or gently discouraged from pursuing ambitious goals can create something extraordinary when given the right resources and support. The empty box my family once handed me had been meant as a subtle reminder of my place in their hierarchy. Instead, it became permission to build something they never could have imagined. Sometimes the most powerful gifts are the ones that force you to fill them yourself. Maya and I still laugh about that parking garage conversation, about how uncertain I was about being seen as successful. Success, it turns out, isn't about other people's recognition. It's about building something meaningful that aligns with your values, creating opportunities for others, and raising the next generation to believe their ambitions are valid and achievable. Emma still keeps that first thank you note from a desert rose designs customer pinned to her bedroom wall, right next to the Forbes article and a photo from our first Rise Collective workshop. She calls it her inspiration corner, and it reminds her daily that ordinary people can build extraordinary things when they're willing to work for their dreams. The jewelry business that started as a desperate attempt to pay bills has become a legacy that extends far beyond anything I could have planned. Not just financial success, but a platform for helping other women transform their own lives through entrepreneurship. The family that once worried about my impractical choices now understands that practical and ambitious aren't mutually exclusive. They've learned to see unconventional paths as valid options rather than concerning deviations from expected norms. Most importantly, I've learned that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, about building the life you envision regardless of whether anyone else can see the vision while you're constructing it. The woman who sold handmade jewelry at farmers markets is the same woman who built a multi-million-dollar company and now helps hundreds of other entrepreneurs achieve their own version of extraordinary success. The only difference is that now, I'm no longer hiding the scope of what's possible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making people regret underestimating you. It's about exceeding their expectations so completely that they have no choice but to expand their understanding of what you're capable of achieving. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in March, nearly 2 months after the Forbes article had changed everything. I was reviewing quarterly reports for Rise Collective when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression that suggested something significant was happening. "There's someone from Goldman Sachs on line 3, she said, her voice carrying the kind of reverence usually reserved for celebrity sightings. "They want to discuss investment opportunities." Goldman Sachs. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have imagined that name appearing in my professional vocabulary. Now, it was just another Tuesday conversation about capital allocation and growth strategies. The call lasted 45 minutes and resulted in an invitation to present Rise Collective's expansion plans to their private wealth management team in New York. They were interested in partnering with us to launch a nationwide network of entrepreneur incubators specifically focused on supporting women-owned businesses in underserved markets. After I hung up, I sat in my office for several minutes, staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline and trying to process how dramatically my world had expanded. The spare bedroom business had become a platform for helping hundreds of other women build their own success stories. The family that had once worried about my ability to pay rent was now asking for investment advice. The daughter who'd been dismissed as impractically ambitious was now being courted by some of the most prestigious financial institutions in the country. Maya knocked on my door an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression she got when she'd been thinking strategically about our next moves. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "Goldman Sachs wants to throw money at us to expand Rise Collective nationwide." Essentially, yes. They're proposing a $50 million fund to establish incubators in 25 cities over the next 3 years. Maya's eyebrows shot up. $50 million. That's exactly what you sold Desert Rose for. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. The money from selling my jewelry business would become the seed capital for a much more ambitious venture focused on helping other women achieve similar success. It felt like the universe was offering me a chance to multiply the impact of everything I'd built. "There's something poetic about it," I said, using the proceeds from one successful business to launch hundreds of others. We spent the rest of the morning discussing the implications of such massive expansion. Rise Collective had been deliberately small-scale for its first year, allowing us to perfect our coaching methodologies and support systems before attempting to scale. But the results had been so consistently positive that larger growth felt not just possible, but necessary. The women we'd worked with were generating real results. Patricia, the soap maker from Tucson, had just signed a distribution deal with a regional grocery chain. Carmen, who'd started making custom wedding invitations from her dining room table, now employed 6 people and was booked solid for the next 18 months. Rachel had transformed her freelance graphic design work into a full-service marketing agency serving clients across 3 states. Each success story reinforced my belief that there were thousands of women across the country who had the talent and determination to build significant businesses, but lacked access to the resources and support systems that could help them scale effectively. The Goldman Sachs partnership would change that equation entirely. Instead of helping dozens of entrepreneurs per quarter, we could support hundreds. Instead of operating from a single location in Phoenix, we could establish a presence in markets where entrepreneurial resources were scarce, but talent was abundant. Emma, now 10 and increasingly involved in our strategic discussions, had her own perspective on the expansion opportunity. "If you help more moms start businesses," she said over dinner that evening, "then more kids will get to see what we've seen." Her observation was characteristically insightful. She'd grown up watching me transform from someone who apologized for her ambitions into someone who pursued them confidently. She'd witnessed the process of building something meaningful from nothing, had seen how persistence and strategic thinking could overcome skepticism and limited resources. The children of the entrepreneurs we worked with were having similar experiences. They were growing up understanding that their mothers were capable of extraordinary achievement, that creative work could generate significant income, that unconventional career paths could lead to remarkable success. "You're right," I told her. "And maybe some of those kids will grow up to start their own businesses, or become doctors or teachers or whatever they want. But they'll know that anything is possible." The decision to accept the Goldman Sachs partnership wasn't difficult, but it did require careful consideration of how rapidly we wanted to scale. Maya and I had built Rise Collective's culture around personalized attention and deep mentorship relationships. Expanding to 25 cities would require systematizing our approach while maintaining the quality that had made us successful. We spent the next month developing detailed operational plans, hiring additional staff, and creating standardized training programs for the coaches who would run satellite locations. The process felt remarkably similar to scaling Desert Rose Designs, but with the added complexity of ensuring consistent quality across multiple markets and coaching teams. My family's reaction to the Goldman Sachs partnership was a perfect illustration of how much their perspective had shifted over the past year. Instead of expressing concern about the risks of such rapid expansion, they wanted to understand the strategic rationale and offered to help however they could. Michael volunteered to review all the legal documentation for the partnership agreement. Katie suggested that we consider establishing an incubator location near the hospital where she worked, pointing out that many nurses had entrepreneurial ideas but lacked business development resources. My parents offered to relocate to whichever city needed additional administrative support for the expansion. Their enthusiasm was gratifying, but it also highlighted something important about family dynamics and conditional support. Their willingness to help now was genuine, but it had required extraordinary success to earn their engagement. The version of me who'd been struggling to grow Desert Rose Designs from her spare bedroom hadn't received offers of assistance, legal advice, or strategic input. I appreciated their current support while also maintaining realistic expectations about its sustainability. Success had made me more interesting to them, but I'd learned not to base my self-worth on their approval or lack thereof. The most meaningful support came from unexpected sources. Amanda, who'd started her own event planning business with Rise Collective's guidance, had become one of our most effective advocates within Phoenix's business community. She understood firsthand how transformative our coaching could be and regularly referred potential entrepreneurs to our programs. "I never understood what you were building until I tried to build something myself," she told me during a family dinner. "The business planning, the marketing strategy, the financial projections, it's incredibly complex. I don't know how you figured it all out on your own." Her acknowledgement meant more than she probably realized. Amanda had been present for years of family conversations where my business was treated as a hobby that might eventually require adult intervention. Now she understood the sophistication required to grow a company from concept to acquisition, and her newfound respect felt like a form of retroactive validation. The launch of our national expansion coincided with Emma's 11th birthday, which she insisted on celebrating with a party that mixed family, Rise Collective entrepreneurs, and kids from her school. The guest list created an interesting cross-section of people who represented different aspects of our transformed life. My parents chatted with Goldman Sachs executives about retirement planning strategies. Michael discussed legal compliance issues with entrepreneurs who were scaling their businesses across state lines. Katie shared nursing school stories with women who were building healthcare-related startups. Emma moved easily between conversations, equally comfortable discussing quarterly profit margins with adult entrepreneurs and planning summer activities with her school friends. She'd developed a natural ability to translate between different social contexts, a skill that would serve her well regardless of what career path she eventually chose. Watching her navigate the party, I realized she was growing up with advantages I'd never had access to. Not just financial advantages, though those were significant, but experiential advantages. She was learning that business ownership was normal, that women could build companies and manage teams and make strategic decisions with confidence. More importantly, she was seeing that success didn't require choosing between professional achievement and family relationships. The entrepreneurs at her party were mothers, daughters, wives, partners who'd found ways to pursue ambitious goals while maintaining strong personal connections. The national expansion of Rise Collective exceeded our most optimistic projections within the first year. We established incubators in 28 cities, supported over 1,500 women-owned businesses, and facilitated more than $12 million in combined revenue growth for our client companies. The success attracted additional media attention, including a feature documentary about women entrepreneurs that followed several Rise Collective participants over 18 months. The film premiered at Sundance and was subsequently picked up by a major streaming platform, exposing our work to a much broader audience. Watching the documentary with Emma at the Phoenix premiere was surreal. The film included footage of our family, interviews with entrepreneurs we'd supported, and time-lapse sequences showing businesses grow from kitchen table operations into legitimate companies with employees and retail partnerships. "Mama," Emma whispered during a scene showing one entrepreneur's emotional breakthrough during a coaching session, "you changed her whole life." She was right, but she was also missing the bigger picture. We hadn't just changed individual lives. We'd begun shifting cultural narratives about what kinds of businesses were worth supporting, what kinds of entrepreneurs deserved resources, and what success could look like for women who chose unconventional paths. The entrepreneurs featured in the documentary represented dozens of different industries and business models. Some had built traditional retail operations, others had developed technology platforms. Still others had created service-based businesses that solved specific problems in their communities. What they shared wasn't a particular industry or business structure, but a willingness to pursue their visions despite skepticism from others and limited access to traditional funding sources. They'd all reached points where conventional wisdom suggested they should give up or scale back their ambitions, and they'd all chosen to persist instead. Their success stories were validation of everything I'd believed about untapped entrepreneurial potential, about the power of providing support rather than skepticism, about what became possible when women were encouraged to think bigger rather than more practically. The documentary's success led to speaking opportunities at business schools, entrepreneur conferences, and women's leadership summits across the country. Each presentation reinforced the same themes that had driven Rise Collective's development: the importance of believing in unconventional visions, the power of systematic support for underrepresented entrepreneurs, and the reality that extraordinary success often comes from unexpected sources. One of the most impactful speaking engagements was at Emma's school, where I'd been invited to discuss entrepreneurship with middle school students. The conversation was refreshingly direct, with kids asking questions that adults rarely thought to pose. "Did you always know you were going to be rich?" asked a 12-year-old girl whose directness reminded me of Emma at that age. "I never thought about being rich," I said honestly. "I thought about solving problems and building something meaningful. The money came from creating value for other people. But now that you are rich, do you feel different?" The question made me pause and consider how wealth had actually affected my daily experience. The answer was more complex than I'd expected. "I feel more free," I said finally. "Free to take risks, free to help other people, free to pursue ideas without worrying about paying rent. But I don't think it changed who I am fundamentally." Emma, who was sitting in the front row with her classmates, raised her hand with a follow-up question. "Mom, Do you think other kids' parents could start businesses too? The question sparked an animated discussion about different types of entrepreneurship, from neighborhood lawn care services to online retail operations to consulting businesses built around existing professional skills. By the end of the presentation, half the students were brainstorming potential business ideas, while the other half were asking about summer internships at Rise Collective. Driving home from the school presentation, Emma and I discussed what it meant for her to grow up in a family where entrepreneurship was normal rather than exceptional. Do you ever wish you had a more regular mom? I asked. Someone with a normal job and predictable schedule? She considered the question seriously, which was characteristic of her thoughtful approach to most topics. Sometimes I think it would be simpler, she said. But then I think about all the cool stuff we get to do, and all the interesting people we meet, and how you're helping other moms build their own businesses. I think our life is better than regular. Her perspective reminded me that the choices I'd made hadn't just affected my own trajectory, but had created a completely different childhood experience for her. She was growing up understanding that work could be fulfilling, that women could lead companies, that creative ideas could generate significant income. More importantly, she was learning that setbacks and skepticism were temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations. She'd watched me navigate family doubt, financial uncertainty, and business challenges while maintaining focus on long-term goals. The lessons she was absorbing weren't just about entrepreneurship, but about persistence, strategic thinking, and the importance of believing in your own vision even when others couldn't see it yet. As Rise Collective continued expanding and supporting more entrepreneurs across the country, I found myself thinking frequently about the butterfly effect of individual choices. The decision to start selling jewelry online, made from desperation, in a small apartment, had created opportunities for thousands of other women to pursue their own business dreams. Each entrepreneur we supported would influence others in their communities, would serve as proof that unconventional success was possible, would raise children who understood that ambitious goals were achievable with the right combination of persistence and support. The ripple effects extended far beyond business metrics and revenue figures. We were participating in a cultural shift toward recognizing and supporting diverse forms of entrepreneurship, toward understanding that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, toward creating systems that help people build on their strengths rather than conform to traditional expectations. Emma, now 12 and increasingly involved in Rise Collective's strategic planning, had begun developing her own ideas about business and social impact. She'd started a small nonprofit focused on providing art supplies to underserved schools, funded entirely through profits from her own handmade goods business. Watching her navigate the complexities of inventory management, customer service, and financial planning while maintaining her commitment to giving back was like seeing a more confident version of my younger self. She approached challenges with the assumption that solutions were possible, that resources could be found, that ambitious goals were worth pursuing. The transformation in my relationship with my family had continued evolving as Rise Collective's success became undeniable. My parents now introduced me as our daughter, the entrepreneur, rather than our daughter who makes jewelry. Michael frequently asked for my input on business development strategies for his law practice. Katie had started her own consulting business focused on healthcare administration, using methodologies she'd learned through observing Rise Collective's coaching approach. Their support felt genuine and sustainable now because it was based on understanding rather than obligation. They'd seen the results of my unconventional choices, had witnessed the positive impact on both our family and the broader community, had learned to recognize strategic thinking even when it didn't follow familiar patterns. The most significant change was in how they talked about Emma's future. Instead of discussing traditional career paths and stable employment options, they now asked about her entrepreneurial interests, her creative projects, her ideas for solving problems she noticed in the world around her. The shift represented everything I'd hoped to achieve through my own success, not just financial security or professional recognition, but a fundamental change in how my family understood what was possible for the women in our lives. 3 years. After the Forbes article that had made my success public, Rise Collective had become a nationally recognized platform for supporting women entrepreneurs. We'd helped launch over 3,000 businesses, facilitated more than $50 million in combined revenue growth, and created a network of successful business owners who supported each other's continued expansion. But the most meaningful measure of success wasn't in the numbers or media coverage or partnership opportunities. It was in the individual stories of transformation, the women who'd discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed, the families who'd watched mothers and daughters build something extraordinary from their own creativity and determination. Emma's 13th birthday party that year included entrepreneurs from 12 different states, kids who were growing up in families where business ownership was normal, and extended family members who now understood that unconventional paths could lead to remarkable destinations. As I watched Emma present her annual business report to the assembled guests, explaining her nonprofit's impact and her plans for expansion, I realized that the most important thing I'd built wasn't Desert, Rose Designs, or Rise Collective, or any measurable business success. It was the example I'd set for her and the other young women in our community, the proof that extraordinary achievement was possible for people who were willing to persist despite skepticism, who could see opportunities where others saw problems, who understood that the biggest limitations were often the ones we accepted rather than the ones imposed by external circumstances. The woman who'd once hidden her success to avoid family judgment had become someone who celebrated other women's achievements, who provided resources for ambitious goals, who understood that the best revenge against being underestimated was exceeding expectations so completely that they became irrelevant. Sometimes the most powerful gift you can give someone is permission to be bigger than they thought possible. The empty box my family had once handed me had become the foundation for building something extraordinary, not just for myself, but for thousands of other women who'd been told their dreams were impractical, unrealistic, or too ambitious. Success, it turns out, isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, then using that proof to help others discover their own extraordinary potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.